So, one of the things that has happened with the advent of power meters like the PowerTap is that it's changed the entire language of professional cycling, and it's given us a pretty extensive and rich vocabulary list. But the fact of the matter is that it's a lot simpler than most people make it out to be. There are only a couple of things that you need to know to understand what power is. So let's start with the basics. First, what is power? Power is really a rate of how much energy you're producing in a given time frame, right? So it's how hard you're working, how much you're busting your ass in any given moment, right? That's probably the easiest way to understand that. Energy over time, that's power output. And power can be simply measured as the force that you're applying to something and the speed at which you're applying it to. So if you think about that relative to a bicycle, you can think of how hard you're pushing on the pedals, and you can also think about how fast you're pedaling. Those are the only two things that you need to quantify when you're measuring power output. But power is actually a more simple concept than that. When you think about power in the context of exercise, power is really the most accurate way to understand your exercise intensity, right? And so when you think about training, you're really thinking about how long you're training, you're thinking about how intense you're training, and you're thinking about how frequently you're training, as well as, the little details or the specifics. Are you doing hills? Are you doing flats? Are you riding the rollers? Are you riding in a pack, not in a pack? Well, fundamentally, the hardest thing to measure of all of those metrics, whether it be time, whether it be intensity, whether it be your frequency, is the intensity component, right? We can gauge intensity by how hard we feel it is. We can gauge intensity by our heart rate response. But those are really effects. They're not really the cause. What's great about power is that it's intensity by measuring the actual cause. It's intensity through the measurement of the actual stimulus. So yeah, you can define power as the energy over time, but really simply, it's the most accurate way to measure your actual exercise intensity. Beyond intensity, beyond power output, you have this other component, duration, right? So how hard did you go? How long did you go? Well, if you multiply those two things out, that function is actually work. And work is an important term when we think about power output, because work actually defines how much energy was used or burned, right? From a mechanical standpoint, which is what the power meter does, it measures mechanical flexion and it measures the speed of that hub. Beyond power output, which is simply a measure of the intensity, you also have duration, you have frequency. If you take the intensity, the power output, and you multiply that out against duration, you get the actual work done, which is another really important term to understand when you're thinking about power output. The work done is ultimately equivalent to the amount of energy that you're expending during exercise. We measure that mechanically with the PowerTap in a unit of measure called the kilojoule. But we more commonly think about energy in terms of calories. Long story short, if you burn 1,000 kilojoules on a bicycle, you're burning about 1,000 calories in your body, right? Or in fuel. More accurately, it's about 1 to about 1.10. So whatever it is, plus an extra 10%. That's super important because in order for us to actually perform, we need the energy to perform, right? We need to be able to understand how much fuel we need to actually feed these athletes when they're out on the road. More importantly, that work index is a great gestalt look at what actually happened, right? It's a function of both intensity as well as time. And it's probably one of the easiest ways to just look at training load as a single number. And so for me, while it's interesting to know what the actual intensity was in terms of average power output, and it's great to know how long these guys are out on the bicycle, when it comes to one number that really describes what happened in training, we think about kilojoules. We think about how much work was done. You know, there are other parts of the power definition that are also important. Power is a function of torque times angular velocity. Torque is actually the amount of force about a lever, right? The angular velocity is how fast something is spinning, right? So that's a pretty simple definition and simple part of the equation. We can also think about power output as how fast you're moving down the road multiplied by all the things holding you back, right? And while everybody understands speed, not everybody understands resistance to movement. And those elements of resistance might be things like gravitational resistance, they might be rolling resistance, they might be aerodynamic drag. There's even resistance associated with accelerating or changes in kinetic energy. That's about it.